Polisano is president of PLP Architecture in London, and we're speaking about high-rises in the urban environment. And you've been in the London market for how long?
25 years.
And it's kind of amazing that really in that time, most of London's new high-rises have been constructed. As we sit here among these new high-rise buildings, what are you thinking about the change that has already happened and about the change that's about to happen?
The change that has happened, I think, generally has been positive. We have here in London, it's very difficult to get an approval for any building, let alone a tall building. So I think you'll see in the buildings that are built and the ones that are being planned that most of them are better than most others in terms of their qualitative and quantitative aspects and what they give back. They're not really tall in a global sense, but they're tall for the context, the historic environment that we live in. So I think it's been proven that tall buildings can coexist within a historic environment and within a low-scale environment and can be integrated into it in one form or another, and that's one of the benefits I think one sees. I think it's helped that London now has a much more diversified built form than it did 15, 20 years ago. That's essential for its economic model and for attracting inward investment and for keeping its vitality as one of the 5 most globally important cities in the world. So I think all that's good. The big shift now is that in terms of tall buildings for residential use. And post-World War II in London, lots of tallish buildings were built to house people because they needed a lot of housing quickly. And they were built very poorly, and the lower socioeconomic classes of people were put in them. They weren't maintained very well. They weren't looked after. They didn't have a very, very strong agenda attached to them in terms of how they were managed and how people used them and things like that. So they decayed rather rapidly, and they basically, very similar to what we had in the US, St. Louis, they became basically something that's quite disliked, and they became eyesores because they weren't built to very high quality. So you're left with a legacy of that. And so today we're sort of batting against that legacy, that bad legacy in terms of the newer types of housing that we're creating. Most of the tall buildings that we're building are for a slightly different socioeconomic class, and they go back to that to the type of people that you're referring to, foreign investors who are buying flats in cities like London. They're also doing it in Toronto and in Vancouver and in many other places, and they're propping up the markets there. But so we're building them now for a different type of occupier than they were built before. But that doesn't necessarily mean that can't be translated back into a broader-based socioeconomic group, and I think that's one of the challenges that we're faced with.
One of the projects of yours that's gotten my attention was this Ludgate House, Sampson House redevelopment in London, and the illustration here gives me the impression of a high-rise building that's really kind of brought down to a comfortable scale at street level, where it's not so big and overwhelming and you have spaces running through it. Am I reading this right? Is that?
Yes, the one in particular image you're looking at actually has quite a large cultural use at its base. So the whole base of the building is given over to a cultural use. That particular project is right next door to the Tate Modern in South London. And the Tate Modern attracts about 7.5 million visitors a year. This is a very, very large site. There's about 9 or 10 buildings that are being built, and they range in height from 200 meters down to 20 meters. And they're creating a series of new public spaces and new routes and permeability through the site. And some of these routes haven't been open for 200 years. So it's unlocking a huge amount of urban potential, not only within its own site, but outside of it in terms of acting as a connector and bringing lots of different types of activities together. It sits at the edge of some of London's most sought-after cultural venues, both the Tate in the east and the National Theatre and others just to the west of it. So it's quite an important place.
As far as high density in London goes, we're told that there's quite a ways to go, that London needs to become more high density. Do you agree, and are you designing for that?
Well, it's quite a dense city at the moment. It's just very low scale. And if you could, if you could add 2 or 3 stories to every single building and house in London, you'd have increased the density phenomenally to the point where it wouldn't make sense to do anything else, because you wouldn't need to. It would give you enough space for a very, very long time. I mean, London has an influx of another 1 million people, and there's probably another 1 million in the next 5 to 10 years, or probably in the next 5 years. So we are building more densely. We are building more wisely. It's challenged. Every building is challenged because it's viewed against, the historic environment that it's cheek by jowl with. So, and I think that's one of its biggest challenges for an architect and for a developer. It's frustrating, but you have to find a way through it. It often leads to better buildings, but at times it could be accused of not using the land as wisely as it could. And that doesn't necessarily, for me, mean every building has to be tall or high-rise.
But does it also offer some interesting opportunities for doing things at ground level? Exceptionally
good ones. So London does not have a zoning policy, so there's nothing prescriptive about height, floor area ratios, plot ratios, or any of those sort of things. So everything is negotiated with the local authority, and in that regard, the more creative and entrepreneurial developers and designers who come in with offers that give something back to the community and give something back to the environment often find that they're pushing out an open door in terms of being allowed to do other things. So in all of our projects, we're always looking at what we can mediate between our client, who's obviously most of the time either a commercial developer or an institution, and the community and the needs of the community, and how we can sort of mediate between the two in terms of helping give something back to the community while still creating the value that our clients seek.
What is your prescription for creating a sense of community among high-rises?
Well, I don't think a set of high-rises can create a sense of community. I think by their nature, they're somewhat exclusive animals. I think if they're integrated into the urban fabric well, and in New York, they're integrated into the urban fabric well, and we're trying to do that here in London. I'd say they're probably not so integrated into the urban fabric in Dubai, or there is no urban fabric or the creation of the urban fabric around them has been neglected. I'd say there are examples of where it looks like we may not be doing such a good job of it in parts of London here now. But so I think essential that they're integrated into the urban fabric, and that's the first bit of prescription that one would look for. Connectivity, activities, those things. The other things that make a community, which aren't part of buildings, is are the people that inhabit the spaces and the places. And one of the things that we're doing a lot of work on is the importance of the entrepreneur in helping to make a sense of community. Because entrepreneurial businesses, whether they're shopkeepers or small biz consulting firms, they actively inhabit and occupy the place and the space that their business is. So the entrepreneurial shopkeeper or the individual shopkeeper who has one beautiful coffee shop or one beautiful patisseria somewhere is there every day, and he builds a sense of community with the neighborhood. They come to know him or her. They come by for a coffee. They come by to just say hello. He looks after their car when they park it and things like that. Those things, you can't design those in, but those are the kinds of things that we're doing a lot of work on, the power of that versus the power of other types of occupiers for these ground floor spaces. And I think those are the kind of things that make a community.
I want to thank you for dropping by Lee Polisano, who's with PLP Architecture here in London. Thank you.
Thank you.